The allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in...
The jeweler did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The moment he confirmed that Princess Diana's sapphire ring had been formally reserved for Prince George, every conversation inside the private Windsor chamber stopped. Harry stared across the table, as though he had misheard the sentence. William remained motionless. Then, without challenging the decision or offering a farewell, the Duke pushed back his chair, crossed the room, and walked through the closing doors. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry had entered Windsor Castle expecting clarification, not exclusion. The closed jewelry review brought together both brothers, a crown archivist and a palace legal advisor. A crown archivist protects and interprets royal records, while a legal advisor ensures private family instructions are followed inside that silent royal chamber. Their purpose was clear: decide who would hold Diana's personal pieces before the next generation assumed greater royal duty. The senior jeweler spoke again carefully. Diana's sapphire ring had been placed under a protected family instruction, naming George as its future recipient. William was not the owner. He was the temporary custodian, trusted to guard it until his eldest son reached the age named in the document. That distinction mattered because custody meant responsibility, not possession, and because the ring carried grief and history. Harry's fingers tightened against the table. He asked whether George had been named directly, or whether the instruction allowed Diana's legacy to be shared between both sons. The legal advisor lowered his eyes before answering. The name was specific. The choice had already been written. William said nothing. The future king watched his brother's face change, recognizing the humiliation beneath the anger. He wanted to defend George, yet he understood what Harry believed he was losing: another link to their mother moving into William's family. Then the jeweler opened a blue velvet case. He did not lift the ring. That restraint made the hidden sapphire feel more powerful than any title in the room. Harry rose so quickly that his chair scraped backward. He looked at William and said, "So that was decided too." The Duke walked out before the advisor could turn the page. As the doors closed, the archivist leaned toward William and revealed what changed everything. George's name was only the beginning. Diana had added a handwritten condition explaining her choice, and that condition involved both brothers. Harry believed the sapphire had just been taken from him, but the truth inside Diana's instruction would reveal that the ring was never simply a jewel, and George was never simply the chosen heir. For William, the sapphire represented a duty he had carried in silence. For Harry, it represented one of the last physical connections to the woman whose absence shaped his entire life. Yet the person named in the instruction was neither brother. It was George, a young prince, now unknowingly placed at the center of a wound that began long before his birth. The inheritance had crossed a generation, but the pain remained trapped between Diana's sons. Harry had never viewed his mother's personal jewelry as ordinary royal property. Crown property meant objects held for the monarchy, preserved for official use rather than private ownership. Diana's pieces felt different to him. They belonged to the woman who had held his hand, comforted him, and tried to protect both boys from the cold pressure surrounding their lives. The sapphire was not merely famous. To Harry, it carried the private memory of a mother whose identity had existed beyond titles, ceremonies, and palace walls. William understood that emotional weight, but he carried a different burden. The future king had safeguarded the ring under a wider family arrangement, believing custody meant protection rather than possession. He had never seen it as a prize. He saw it as a promise: keep Diana's legacy safe until her grandchildren were old enough to understand that inheriting something precious could also mean inheriting pain. Halfway down the Windsor passage, Harry stopped. Anger had carried him through the doors, but grief stopped him beside the cold stone windowsill. He pressed one hand against it and tried to steady his breathing. Childhood memories returned without warning: his mother preparing for an engagement, the soft movement of jewelry, the small objects that had once made her presence feel permanent. Now even those memories seemed to be moving further away from him. Inside the chamber, William's first concern was George. He turned to the senior jeweler and insisted that his son must not discover the truth through public controversy. The prince feared the boy might believe he had taken something from his uncle. That possibility disturbed him more than Harry's accusation, because George had not asked to become the center of their unfinished grief. The legal advisor then revealed that King Charles had reviewed the instruction months earlier. The monarch had delayed the meeting until every marking, signature, and custody note had been authenticated, meaning formally examined and confirmed as genuine. Charles had known the decision would wound one son while placing pressure on the other. Then came another shock. Catherine had also been informed privately. Diana's document had assigned the princess a future responsibility connected to George and the Sapphire, though William had not yet been told exactly what that duty required. Outside, Harry's phone vibrated with a message asking whether the meeting was over. He began typing a reply. William kept the final piece. The words exposed a grievance far deeper than jewelry. The brothers appeared divided by a sapphire, but their confrontation had been building for years, and one forgotten ceremony had transformed quiet unease into an irreversible family dispute. The conflict did not begin when the jeweler opened the sealed file. It began 18 months earlier, during a private memorial service, when George was asked to carry a small blue velvet box into the family chapel. Harry noticed the box immediately. William noticed Harry noticing it. No explanation was offered, but from that moment, suspicion entered a space once occupied by grief. What happened after the service became the silent trigger behind the Windsor walkout. William had arranged the memorial to be quiet, private, and free from public ceremony. Catherine stood beside him, George remained close to his parents, and Harry arrived carrying memories he rarely discussed. Charles joined them with only a handful of trusted household staff present. The service marked the anniversary of Diana's death, and everyone understood why secrecy mattered. This was not a royal performance. It was a family confronting the same absence in painfully different ways. George was then asked to carry the sealed velvet box forward and place it beside Diana's photograph. No ring was shown, yet the jeweler's historic crest marked the case as part of an authenticated royal collection. Authentication meant formally confirming that an object, signature, or record was genuine. Harry recognized the emblem immediately, and the moment the box left the young prince's hands, suspicion began hardening inside him. Harry waited until the chapel had emptied. Beside the vestry door, a private entrance used by clergy and family members, he stopped William and asked why George had been entrusted with one of their mother's cases. The prince answered carefully. It concerned something Mum arranged, but he would explain nothing until the authentication process was complete. That refusal changed everything. Harry accused his brother of allowing royal procedure to decide who could claim Diana's memory. He said their mother had been turned into a line of succession, with every important object moving toward William's branch of the family. The words struck hard because the future king understood the fear beneath them, even if he rejected the accusation itself. William held his ground. He told Harry that Diana's wishes could not be rewritten simply because they caused pain. When the Duke stepped toward the velvet case, the elder brother moved between them without thinking. It was an instinctive act of protection, but Harry saw something else. A barrier closing around another part of their mother. Days later, a palace jeweler discovered that the box's inventory number did not match the public record attached to Diana's engagement ring. It belonged to a private inheritance file created before her death. The Crown Archivist traced that number to a sealed 2-page instruction. The first page named George. The second contained a personal explanation Charles feared would reopen the deepest wound between his sons. By the time the brothers entered the Windsor jewelry chamber, neither man was reacting only to the jeweler's words. They were returning to the chapel door, where trust between them had first begun to collapse. Harry had already reached the end of the corridor when anger overcame restraint. He turned back, crossed the same distance he had just escaped, and pushed open the chamber doors without waiting to be admitted. The jewelers fell silent. William remained beside the table. What followed was not a debate over ownership. It was a confrontation between two sons who had spent years accusing each other of misunderstanding the woman they had both lost. Harry returned to find the Sapphire case still closed. The second page remained beneath the archivist's hand, untouched but no longer hidden. William asked the advisors to leave, hoping the argument could remain between brothers. The Duke refused. He wanted the jewelers to stay because every answer now required witnesses. No private explanation would be enough. Too much trust had already been lost. The senior jeweler spoke first. William had never possessed unrestricted ownership of the ring. He had been named as its custodian, meaning the temporary guardian responsible for protecting it, while the future beneficiary had been identified by name and bloodline. The distinction was clear, but clarity did not soften the blow. It only proved that the arrangement had existed long before Harry entered the room. Harry stepped directly opposite his brother and asked the question he had carried from the chapel 18 months earlier. Had William ever intended to tell him that George had been chosen? The Duke accused the future king's household of controlling every truth until it became impossible to challenge. Secrets, he said, always seemed to end in the same place, with William holding the document and everyone else waiting outside. William finally broke. He raised his voice and said he had protected the file because Diana's instruction involved his son. He also accused Harry of turning every private family decision into evidence of betrayal. The prince had remained silent to shield George, not to punish his brother, but silence had now become another weapon between them. The jeweler interrupted before the argument could go further. Diana had specifically rejected any plan to dismantle, redesign, or divide the sapphire setting. The ring had to remain whole because its meaning depended on surviving as one recognizable object. Breaking it apart would have destroyed the history she wanted preserved. William then revealed why George had been selected. The young prince was not named because he was more loved or more deserving. Diana had instructed that the sapphire should pass to the first grandchild, standing directly in the future line of monarchy, the succession path determining who would eventually inherit the crown. Harry did not calm down. He pointed toward the concealed page and demanded that William read every word aloud, including the passage Charles had advised them to hear privately. William had defended the decision as duty, but Diana's own words were about to reveal whether that duty was an act of love or a judgment Harry could never forgive. The authority behind the decision did not belong to William, Charles, the jewelers, or the palace council. It belonged to a handwritten clause Diana had placed beneath her formal instruction. The ink was faded, but the language was unmistakable. She had anticipated that the sapphire might become a source of rivalry, symbolism, and public expectation. Her answer was neither sentimental nor simple. She tied the ring to the future of the monarchy and tied both sons to the responsibility of protecting it. The Crown Archivist lifted the document carefully and confirmed that it had been preserved beside authenticated private jewelry records. Those records were formal files used to verify ownership, history, and custody. Although the sapphire was not treated like ordinary palace property, Diana's wording carried enough authority to guide how the family protected it. Her instruction was personal, but its consequences reached directly into the royal future. Diana's intention soon became clear. The ring was to remain within the direct royal line and eventually pass to the eldest child capable of understanding both its emotional history and public meaning. She did not want the sapphire reduced to wealth, fashion, or status. She wanted its next holder to recognize that the jewel carried love, loss, duty, and the painful memory of a life watched by millions. Charles entered after being told that Harry had returned. The king took the page, read the clause in silence, then removed his glasses and set them down. He understood what Diana had feared. She had imagined a day when their sons might fight over her memory, each believing the other had taken too much. Harry turned on his father and demanded to know why the file had been withheld after its authentication. Charles answered without anger. He had wanted certainty before placing Diana's final instruction between two brothers whose relationship was already damaged. A doubtful signature or disputed record would have caused another battle. The monarch had waited because one mistake could have destroyed what little trust remained. The legal advisor then explained the limits placed on William. The prince could not sell the sapphire, give it away, redesign it, loan it permanently, or transfer it to another person. A custodial arrangement meant he could protect the ring without owning its future. Until George accepted that responsibility, every decision remained restricted. Then came the clause Harry had not expected. Diana had named him too. Her younger son was to act as a personal witness when George eventually received the sapphire. She wanted Harry present so the moment would represent family continuity, not victory by William's branch. But Harry heard no comfort in those words. He called the role ceremonial consolation, and told Charles that watching the ring pass away from him did not heal the exclusion. It confirmed it. Diana had written Harry into the Sapphire's future, yet he could only see the inheritance he had lost, and his refusal would soon force the entire family to confront life after the decision. The argument ended without reconciliation. Harry left Windsor for a second time, but now everyone understood that the walkout was not temporary anger. He had rejected the role Diana gave him and refused to stand beside George when the Sapphire eventually changed hands. Behind the closed doors, William faced a different reality. Protecting his son's inheritance might cost George a relationship with the uncle, whose presence Diana had deliberately written into the future. Charles acted first. The king ordered every copy of the inheritance record secured and instructed the household to release no public statement. His aim was not to hide the decision. It was to protect George from becoming the face of a conflict he had never created. The monarch understood that once the story escaped the family, the young prince could be blamed for receiving something he had neither requested nor even fully understood. The jewelers moved quickly. They returned the sapphire to a reinforced private case and transferred it to a secure vault, meaning a protected storage chamber used for objects of exceptional value and importance. 2 specialists witnessed the movement, signed the custody log, and recorded the ring beneath George's protected inheritance designation. Every step confirmed the same brutal truth. The decision now had weight, structure, and permanence. Harry felt that permanence inside his waiting vehicle. He removed his cufflinks, dropped them onto the seat, and stared back toward Windsor's entrance. His security officer asked whether he wanted to leave immediately. The Duke answered that he had arrived expecting clarity, but was leaving with another boundary drawn around his mother. To him, the sapphire had become proof that even Diana's memory could be controlled by rules he could not influence. William carried a different fear into his meeting with Catherine. He admitted that George might one day believe the family fracture was his fault. The prince could defend the document, but he could not protect his son from every whisper surrounding it. Catherine answered firmly. Their child had not created Diana's instruction, and he must never apologize for receiving his grandmother's trust. Then the princess revealed something William had not yet been told. Diana had left a short personal note to accompany the sapphire when George became old enough to receive it. The message had been stored separately, so its emotional language could not influence the formal authentication process. It was not part of the legal proof. It was meant for the boy. William immediately thought of Harry. His brother had walked out before learning that the note existed. Its words might explain Diana's choice more clearly than any official clause, yet opening it early would violate the timing she had deliberately chosen. Charles now faced an impossible decision. He could not rewrite the document, reveal the sealed note, or force forgiveness. But he could still share the personal truth behind Diana's choice. The king could not rewrite Diana's document, yet he could still bring her sons into the same room without jewelers, lawyers, or locked cases standing between them. Charles did not summon a council. He did not bring legal advisors or demand obedience. Instead, he asked William and Harry to meet him inside a small private room containing only 3 chairs and a framed photograph of Diana with both boys. When the brothers entered, the king placed the photograph on the table between them. For the first time since the Sapphire revelation, no institution stood behind the decision. There were only 2 sons, one father, and an unfinished grief. Charles ordered every aide to remain outside. No secretary would record the exchange, and no advisor would soften the words. Harry chose the chair nearest the door, leaving himself an easy path to escape. William sat opposite him, tense but controlled. The monarch allowed the 3rd chair to remain empty for several seconds before finally taking his place, as though silence itself needed to speak first. The king explained what Diana had feared. She believed the sapphire could one day become a trophy attached to rank, something measured by who received it, rather than what it represented. By naming George as the future holder and Harry as the witness, she tried to separate inheritance from emotional ownership. One person would carry the ring. Another would protect the truth behind it. Harry finally lowered his guard. He admitted that his anger had never truly been directed at George. His fear was deeper. As William's children inherited more of Diana's visible legacy, He worried that his own children would grow up believing their grandmother belonged mainly to the future king's family. The Duke had not walked out because he hated his nephew. He had walked out because exclusion had begun to feel permanent. William listened without interrupting. Then the prince admitted his own failure. He should have explained the memorial ceremony instead of hiding behind authentication, the formal process used to prove that a record or object is genuine. His silence had protected the document, but it had also allowed Harry to imagine the cruelest possible reason for being kept outside. Charles then revealed what neither brother had discussed. Diana had created a separate personal inheritance for Harry's family, one without royal ceremony, public display, or connection to succession. It was never meant to compete with the Sapphire. It was meant to preserve a different part of her life. William added one final truth. Harry would not simply stand beside George and watch the ring change hands. He would be expected to tell the young prince who Diana had been beyond photographs, headlines, and royal history. That duty could not be performed by a jeweler or an archivist. Only her son could do it. Harry turned the photograph toward himself. After a long silence, he pushed it gently back to the center. He offered no forgiveness, but he agreed to reconsider walking away. The family had finally spoken without protocol, but the Sapphire story was already moving beyond the palace, where one public image would define how the world judged Harry's departure. The palace released no details, yet silence could not contain the story. By morning, Britain was staring at one image, William leaving Windsor beside the senior jeweler, while an empty chair remained visible through the open chamber doorway behind him. The photograph appeared across television screens and newspaper front pages. Without seeing the Sapphire or reading Diana's instruction, the public understood that someone had left, and every headline reached the same conclusion about who it was. The palace issued only a brief confirmation. Diana's jewelry arrangements, it said, remained private and protected. The statement was meant to close the matter, but its careful wording did the opposite. By refusing to deny the walkout, the household allowed speculation to grow. Every silence became evidence. Every missing detail became another version of the truth. Charles refused to let the conflict be described as William's victory or Harry's defeat. The king instructed Palace Communications, the team responsible for official royal statements, to emphasize that George had not received immediate possession of the ring. He had inherited a future responsibility. The Sapphire remained secured, and the young prince had no control over it. William heard the public judgment before breakfast had ended. A broadcaster called the walkout, "a mother's jewel reopening a brother's wound." The prince reached for the remote just as George entered and lowered the volume. He could endure criticism directed at himself, but he would not allow his son to hear strangers discussing him as the cause of family pain. Harry watched the same coverage elsewhere. At first, the Duke dismissed the reports as another attempt to turn grief into entertainment. Then the accusations sharpened. Commentators suggested that he resented George, that his anger had been aimed at a child rather than the system surrounding him. For the first time since leaving Windsor, Harry felt regret. His silence had protected his pride, but it had also allowed the world to invent his motives. Outside Kensington Palace, a small crowd gathered near Diana's memorial garden. One woman placed a blue ribbon beside the gates with a handwritten message, for both her sons and the grandson carrying her story forward. The gesture was simple, but it cut through the noise. It recognized the pain without assigning blame. Harry saw the ribbon during an evening broadcast. He picked up his phone and sent William 7 words. George should never carry blame for this. William did not answer with an argument. He sent a photograph of Diana standing between them as children. Harry studied it in silence, then contacted Charles and said he had made a final decision about the witness role. The world had turned Harry's walkout into a judgment, but his next action would determine whether that doorway marked a permanent exit or the beginning of a different kind of loyalty. Harry did not ask for the ring. He did not challenge George's inheritance or demand that Diana's instruction be rewritten. Instead, he returned to Windsor and entered the same chamber he had twice abandoned. William was waiting beside the closed velvet case. This time there were no raised voices and no advisors explaining legal language. Harry placed one hand on the table and gave the answer that finally separated his grief from the Sapphire's future. Harry asked that the Sapphire remain inside its case. Charles stood nearby as the senior jeweler waited beside the file. The Duke no longer needed to see the ring. The question was whether Diana's wishes could survive the anger they had awakened. A witness designation meant a formally recorded roll confirming acceptance of the inheritance. William confirmed that nothing would change. George would remain the future recipient, the ring would stay protected, and Diana's instruction would stand. The prince spoke without triumph. He knew safeguarding the sapphire had preserved the object, but secrecy had nearly destroyed its family meaning. Harry accepted the role his mother had given him. He would stand beside George when the sapphire passed into his care. The Duke made one point clear. This was not submission to palace authority. It was respect for Diana's choice and recognition that walking away would let pain define everything. William answered with an apology. He admitted that silence had become a weapon, even when he believed he was protecting his son. The future king promised George would learn the ring connected both brothers to their mother. It did not prove one son had been loved more, nor make one family the owner of Diana's memory. Harry knew what he would tell his nephew. The sapphire was never a reward. It was a responsibility entrusted to the generation carrying Diana's public legacy forward. George would inherit the jewel and the duty to understand the suffering, courage, and love behind it. The jeweler closed the file. Harry took the pen, signed beside the witness designation, and slid the document toward William. The brothers did not embrace. The prince placed his hand over the signature and met his brother's eyes. The inheritance did not heal every wound, but it ended the battle over the sapphire. George received its future, Harry reclaimed his place in its story, and William learned that protection without openness could become exclusion. There was no further secret, unanswered claim, or second walkout, only Diana's decision preserved, and the sapphire transformed from division into lasting family continuity. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.